So, I don't even know where to begin. I guess the most straightforward way is to say that my life blew up in ways I never thought possible. It all started with Amanda, my wife. We've been together for almost 10 years, and well, you think you know a person, right? You think you have everything figured out, and then they hit you with something that completely changes everything. It was a typical Tuesday night, nothing out of the ordinary. Amanda came home from work, looking a little more frazzled than usual, but that was nothing new. She'd been working at this marketing firm for about 3 years, and honestly, I'd been proud of how far she'd come. She started as a junior and had worked her way up to senior account manager. Lots of late nights, a bit of stress, but she seemed to love the job, and I supported her. I wanted her to succeed. But that night, she came to me with a proposal that I never saw coming. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table, picked at her salad for a bit. She'd been doing this weird health kick thing for a couple weeks. And then, out of nowhere, she says, "Caleb, I've been thinking about something." I remember looking up, kind of like a half smile on my face, expecting some random work thing or maybe something about our vacation plans. But no. It was far more complicated than that. She looked at me, straight in the eyes, and said, "I want to sleep with Ethan. You know, my boss. Just one night. It'll help me get the promotion I've been working for." Now, I don't know what you would have done in my place, but I just froze. Like, I literally couldn't move. I had to hear it again, because I was pretty sure I misunderstood. So I asked, "Wait, what? You want to sleep with Ethan? As in, the guy you work for? Your boss?" She just nodded, her face so damn calm, like it was some casual request for an extra day off. "Yeah. He's been pushing for it, Caleb. It's just business. It'll help my career, and it's not like we'll be having an affair or anything. Just one night. It won't mean anything." At this point, I should have been angry, right? I should have blown up, called her out, maybe even walked out. But I didn't. I didn't know what to say. I just sat there, processing what she was telling me. This was insane. But at the same time, I knew Amanda. She was always so driven when it came to her career. And Ethan? He was always flirting with her in meetings, sending her extra work late at night, giving her all the big accounts. I thought about the promotion she'd been talking about for months, how she always said she was one step away from being the head of the department. If sleeping with him could really help, maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as crazy as she sounded. I still wasn't sure. But I told her, "You really think this is a good idea?" She looked me dead in the eye, no hesitation. "I wouldn't ask you if I didn't think it was. I'll do it, Caleb. But I want your blessing. I don't want any secrets between us. I want you to be okay with it." And then she said the words that, looking back, I should have known would haunt me for the rest of my life. "If you truly love me, you'll let me do this." There it was. She framed it like it was some kind of test. Like if I didn't support her, I didn't really love her. And like an idiot, I tried to be the good husband. I told her, "I want what's best for you. If this is what you need to do, I'm not going to stand in your way." Big mistake. I still remember that cold knot in my stomach as I said it, but I thought, okay, maybe I'm overthinking it. It's just one night. What's the worst that could happen, right? So the whole thing went down about a week later. And I'm sitting here, trying to think if there was some sign I missed, some gut feeling I could have trusted. But I guess I just didn't want to see it. Amanda acted like it was no big deal. She spent a few nights leading up to it all stressed, like she was prepping for some big presentation or something. But when the night finally came, she was, I don't know, too calm. It felt rehearsed. She looked in the mirror, adjusted her dress, checked her makeup like she was getting ready for a date, not some business transaction, as she'd put it. I was supposed to be out of the house that evening. Amanda told me she was going to Ethan's place to talk shop, work out some details for a new campaign. She said it so casually, like this was some regular part of her job. Honestly, I thought I'd be fine. She asked me to go grab drinks with my friends, so I could give her space. I remember that night. I was pretending everything was normal. I just kept telling myself, this is fine. I left at about 7:30, and I figured she'd be back by 10. The whole time, I felt like I was holding my breath, but I kept telling myself, Caleb, you agreed to this. You're not going to be a jealous husband. Anyway, I did my thing, grabbed a beer with Matt and Greg, but I was still checking my phone every 5 minutes. Part of me was convinced I'd get some kind of update. Maybe a text like, "Hey, this is weird," or "I don't know about this." But nothing. The silence was deafening. Around midnight, I got a text from Amanda. "Hey babe, I'm staying at Ethan's tonight. It's late and the roads are bad. I'll be home tomorrow." That felt off to me. I mean, the roads weren't that bad. And they definitely weren't bad enough for her to be staying over at his house. But I didn't want to be that guy, the one who questions everything, who gets all paranoid. I convinced myself that it was just work stuff, and that she really just didn't want to drive in the middle of the night. Still, a weird little voice was buzzing in the back of my head. I went home at about 1:30 a.m., and the house was exactly how I'd left it, quiet, empty, everything in place. The next morning, she came home around 9 a.m., looking like she hadn't slept a wink. Her hair was messy, her makeup smudged. I remember her hugging me, saying, "Sorry I stayed out so late." Ethan can be a real night owl when he's in work mode. But there was something in her eyes, something I couldn't shake. She looked at me, gave me this kind of half smile, but there was no warmth. It was like she was already putting up this wall, and I didn't know if it was because of the affair or because she knew what was coming. When I asked her how the night went, she told me it was fine. No big deal. They had some drinks, talked about the project, and she swore nothing happened beyond work talk. But I wasn't stupid. I knew her. I knew her too well. And when she left to go shower, I took a few minutes to look around her purse. Stupid, I know, but I needed to know. The guilt was eating me alive. It's not like I was hoping to find something. I just needed proof. And I found it. Her phone. I saw a text from Ethan that made my heart drop. It wasn't anything overt, nothing too direct, but it was enough. He'd sent her a simple, "I'll see you soon," but there was this underlying tone of intimacy, of understanding. I knew exactly what that meant. They were still talking. This wasn't just about business. It was like a bomb went off inside me. I didn't even realize how fast I was shaking until my hands started sweating. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I just sat there. I couldn't even look at her when she came out of the bathroom. She went on about how tired she was, and how hard Ethan worked her, like that was supposed to explain the weird vibe she was giving off. But I couldn't even process her words. She didn't know it yet, but things were about to change. At that point, I didn't know what I was going to do. All I knew was that I couldn't just let this slide. I had to figure out a way to make her see the consequences of what she'd done. But first, I needed to think. And of course, that meant getting to work on something I never thought I'd be capable of, revenge. So, after that night, things got even weirder. Amanda was acting like nothing had changed. She came home the next day, all casual, still putting on this everything's fine face. I tried to pretend like I was cool with it, but honestly, I could feel the tension building. Like, the air was thick with it. I spent the next couple of days trying to figure out what to do. Part of me was still in this weird limbo, thinking maybe I was overreacting. Maybe she had just stayed late at Ethan's to talk business. But another part of me, honestly the smarter part, knew she was lying to my face. I wasn't stupid. I knew how these things went. I didn't need her to tell me what happened. I could feel it. The guilt she was hiding. The way she was pulling away. I started thinking about my next move. And let me tell you, once that thought clicked in my brain, I couldn't unthink it. The thing about Amanda is she always liked to be in control. She was the one who decided everything. Our plans, our finances, what we did in bed. And I let her. I let her run the show because I thought that was how relationships worked. But now, I wanted control back. I was going to make her pay for what she did, and I was going to do it without her even seeing it coming. I didn't confront her yet. I knew I couldn't. She would just lie her way out of it. No, I needed a plan, something solid that would take everything down, piece by piece. And that meant taking down Ethan too. I needed to hit them where it hurt the most, their careers, their reputations, their lives. So, I did what any guy with a broken heart would do. I started digging. I wasn't sure where to start, but I knew one thing for sure. If Amanda thought she could get away with this without consequences, she was wrong. I wasn't about to be the guy who just sat back and let it happen. Not after everything we'd been through. I began by going through her things more carefully, looking for any sort of evidence, anything that might help me piece together what exactly happened that night. It felt wrong, like I was crossing a line I couldn't come back from, but I was past caring. It was like she had already crossed it when she made the decision to sleep with Ethan. I wasn't being a paranoid husband, I was getting justice. I started with her phone. Now, I wasn't proud of snooping, but I had to know. I went through her texts, her emails, and I even dug through her social media accounts. Eventually, I came across something interesting, an email thread between Amanda and Ethan. It was mostly about work stuff, but there was a lot of flirting in there. Subtle at first, but then it started getting pretty blatant. Ethan was sending her messages about looking forward to seeing her and how he couldn't wait to celebrate the project's success, but it wasn't just business talk. There were these little jabs about how she looked when she wore certain outfits, how they could have more fun next time. It was gross. I didn't find anything explicit, but that didn't matter. The tone was more than enough to confirm what I already knew. They had something going on. And it was more than just one night. So, I did what any decent husband would do in this situation. I reached out to Ethan's wife. Her name was Laura, and she was as sweet as they come. We had met a few times over the years, at company events or random social gatherings, and I could tell she was a genuinely nice person. But she had no idea what her husband was up to. She had no clue about Amanda. I didn't call her right away though. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I started small. I'd run into her at the grocery store or at a coffee shop and make casual conversation. Over time, I noticed she seemed more stressed than usual. Tired. Like she was holding something back, but didn't know what it was. Then one day when I ran into her at a park with her kids, I just asked, "Hey, you doing okay? You and Ethan seem a little off lately," I said, keeping it light, like I wasn't digging for something. She smiled, but it was weak. "Oh, it's just work stuff. You know how he gets when he's busy. But we're fine." But I could tell it wasn't just work stuff. The way she said it, like she was trying to convince herself more than me, told me everything. And that was when I knew it was time. I made my move. I sent Laura a message on Facebook a couple of days later. Short, to the point, no drama. Just facts. "I think you should know about something going on between Amanda and Ethan. I don't know how much you know, but you deserve the truth." I didn't say anything more, but I made sure to include a screenshot of the email chain I'd found. I didn't need to say much else. She'd figure it out for herself. I sent it, and I waited. I didn't even know what I was hoping for. Part of me thought she'd just ignore it, or maybe she'd confront Ethan and give him the benefit of the doubt. But something told me she wouldn't. The next morning, I woke up to a message from Laura. She had read it. I had no idea. "I don't know what to say, but I'm going to confront him. I'm going to make sure he never does this again." I didn't reply. I just sat there, staring at the screen. I knew this was going to get messy. And I knew that once Laura started digging, things would spiral out of control fast. But I was too deep in it now to back out. I wanted them both to pay. I wanted them to feel the weight of what they'd done. And I wasn't done yet. The storm was just starting to brew. The next few days felt like I was holding my breath. I didn't hear from Laura again, but I could feel things shifting. You know that feeling when something's about to go down, and you're just waiting for the hammer to drop? That's where I was. And then, about 3 days later, I got the first sign of what was coming. It was a Friday afternoon, and I was at home, trying to keep busy. Amanda had been acting off all week, distant, defensive, like she could sense something was wrong but didn't know exactly what. She'd been glued to her phone, a little too much for comfort, and I caught her deleting texts a couple of times when she thought I wasn't looking. Anyway, around 3:30 p.m., I get a call from an unfamiliar number. It's Laura. I pick up, my stomach already turning. "Caleb," she says, her voice tight, almost shaky. "We need to talk." That's when I knew it was happening. She had confronted Ethan. She had found out everything. I told her to meet me at a cafe nearby, and when I walked in, I found her sitting there, looking like she hadn't slept in days. She didn't waste time. "Ethan's denying it, Caleb," she said, almost laughing. "But I know. I know he's lying. I've seen the way he looks at Amanda. It's been going on for months, hasn't it?" I nodded. There was no point in denying it. She already knew. But then she hit me with something I wasn't expecting. "I'm going to file for divorce. And I'm going to make sure everyone at his work knows what he's done. I won't be a victim anymore." That wasn't just anger talking. Laura's eyes were dead serious. She was done being passive. And that was when it hit me. I wasn't alone in this anymore. When I got home that evening, Amanda was already there, acting like she hadn't just set everything in motion. She tried to kiss me on the cheek, but I pulled back. "Amanda," I said, voice low, "you have no idea what you've done." She just looked at me, a little confused. "What are you talking about?" "I know everything. I know about you and Ethan." She froze. The color drained from her face. "What?" "No, you don't," she stammered, trying to laugh it off. "You're just overreacting." It was nothing, Caleb. But I could tell she wasn't fooling herself anymore. She knew I had the proof. I could see it in her eyes. I didn't give her a chance to explain or lie her way out of it. Instead, I took out my phone, opened the messages, and showed her the email exchange. Her face went pale. She started shaking her head. No, that's not what it looks like." But it didn't matter what it looked like anymore. She was cornered. "You don't get it, do you?" I said, my voice quiet but firm. "This is bigger than you. I've already reached out to Laura. She knows everything now. She's leaving Ethan. And so am I." The look on Amanda's face. It was a mix of shock, disbelief, and guilt. But she didn't cry or beg. She just stood there, like she was trying to process what had happened. But I didn't need to hear her excuses. I'd already made up my mind. And just like that, I started pulling the threads. The next few days were chaotic. Amanda was trying to play it cool, but it was clear she was unraveling. She wasn't looking at me the same way anymore, not like before. It wasn't that she was guilty. No, it was more like she was calculating, like she was trying to figure out how to fix things, how to make me forgive her. But I wasn't playing that game anymore. I wasn't even angry at that point. I was just done. She tried to talk to me several times, tried to convince me it was all a mistake, that she was just caught up in the pressure at work, that Ethan had manipulated her. She kept saying it didn't mean anything, like she could make me believe her if she repeated it enough. But I'd already heard that lie. It wasn't enough to cover what she'd done. I didn't say much to her after that. I went about my day like usual, but I was already working behind the scenes. I reached out to a couple of Amanda's colleagues, people she had always trusted, and told them what had happened. I didn't go into the specifics, but I gave them enough details to spark their curiosity. The rumors about Amanda's promotion? I told them it wasn't just about work. Ethan had made promises. They'd both crossed lines. And I made sure they knew that Laura was filing for divorce. I let the whispers start. But that wasn't enough. I had to hit Ethan where it hurt the most, his job. I didn't know the full extent of his dirty dealings, but I knew his position at the firm was important to him. If I could shake his reputation, maybe even get him fired, that'd be the justice I was looking for. I made a couple of calls to people I knew who worked in the same industry. One was an old friend who worked at a rival firm, and the other was a journalist who specialized in corporate scandals. I didn't get into specifics, but I gave them enough to connect the dots between Ethan's relationship with Amanda and some of the unethical practices I knew he was involved in, stuff that could get him in real trouble if it ever came to light. It didn't take long for things to escalate. Within a week, the gossip started spreading like wildfire. Ethan's reputation started to crack. His clients were dropping him, and his superiors at the company were getting nervous. The whispers about his affair with Amanda went public, and with it came the allegations of workplace misconduct. It was the perfect storm. I didn't feel bad about it. Not at all. If anything, I felt a weird sense of satisfaction watching everything crumble around them. They thought they could get away with it, that their little secret was safe. But I wasn't going to let that happen. When Ethan got called into a meeting with HR, I knew his time was running out. The company couldn't ignore the scandal anymore. And I wasn't done yet. I had one more card to play. The moment I saw Ethan walk out of that HR meeting, I knew he was done. His face was pale, his shoulders slumped, and he had this vacant look in his eyes like he just realized everything he'd built was about to come crashing down. I wasn't even there to see it in person. I didn't need to be. I already knew how it would go. The company couldn't protect him anymore. There were too many people who knew about his affair with Amanda, too many whispers about his shady dealings. He was a liability now. I couldn't help but feel a little smug. I'd been patient, methodical, but now it was happening. Ethan was losing everything, his job, his status, and probably his marriage too. I had done that. But I wasn't finished yet. I still had Amanda to deal with. The next day, Amanda came home from work early, looking like she hadn't slept in days. I didn't need to ask what had happened. She was already avoiding eye contact, trying to act like everything was fine, but I could see the panic creeping into her eyes. She knew I was the one behind all of it. She knew the walls were closing in. She sat down in front of me, her voice shaking as she tried to play it off. Caleb, I know this has been hard for you. And I know I've made a huge mistake, but we can work through this, can't we? I just looked at her, not saying anything. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was numb. Caleb, she said again, her voice more desperate now. Please. Please don't do this. I can fix this. Ethan. Ethan's being ridiculous. He's just making everything worse. We can still fix us. I shook my head slowly. You think you can just fix this? After everything you've done? After everything I've watched you do? She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off. No. Don't even try. You've already destroyed this marriage. And now, you're going to face the consequences. She froze. I could see the realization hit her, and it was like a switch flipped in her. She stopped pleading. Instead, she just sat there, tears welling up in her eyes, like she was finally seeing the fallout of her choices. The silence between us felt suffocating. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. I wasn't going to pretend like we could somehow fix it. I'd already given her the chance to come clean, to be honest with me, but she didn't. Now, she had to face what she'd set in motion. I called your parents, I said flatly. I told them what happened. They'll be here tomorrow. Her face went white. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. It wasn't just her job that was at risk now. She was going to lose everything, the family reputation, the life we'd built, and the trust of everyone who ever believed in her. Please, Caleb, she whispered, her voice cracking. Please don't do this. You're going to destroy me. I didn't feel bad for her. Not anymore. If anything, I was almost relieved. I had taken control back. I had forced her to face what she had done, and now she was going to pay for it. The next day, her parents showed up. They were furious, obviously. Her mom was crying, asking how Amanda could do something like this. Her dad was just quiet, staring at Amanda like he couldn't believe the daughter he'd raised was capable of something so cold. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. I let them do the work. I let them see the wreckage their daughter had caused. When they left, Amanda barely said a word to me. She didn't need to. She knew it was over. I didn't feel a shred of regret. By the end of the week, Ethan's world was in full freefall. His colleagues had turned on him. The company had made it clear that they were distancing themselves from him. Word about his affair with Amanda had spread like wildfire, and his reputation was shredded. He had tried to reach out to me a couple of times, like we could somehow work out a deal or find a way to cover this all up, but I didn't take his calls. I wasn't interested in negotiating with the man who had betrayed me, and I sure wasn't going to let him get away with it. But then, about 5 days after the HR meeting, I got a text from Laura. Caleb, Ethan's been let go. He's been fired. They've cut him off completely. He's completely lost it. I don't know what to do. I wasn't surprised. Honestly, I had expected it, but seeing it in black and white made it feel real. Ethan had always been so arrogant, so sure of himself. I had watched him manipulate Amanda for months, thinking he could control everything. Now, he was on the other side of it. And it felt good. When I met Laura later that day, she looked exhausted. Her eyes were red, her hands shaking slightly, but there was this look of quiet victory behind her exhaustion. I could tell she was finally letting go of the weight that had been dragging her down. I don't know what to do now, she admitted, sitting across from me at a quiet cafe. I've already talked to the lawyers. I'm filing for divorce, but Ethan, he's not handling this well. He's begging me to come back, telling me he made a mistake. He's blaming the affair on everything else, like it's all my fault. Like he didn't do anything wrong. I just shook my head. He'll blame everyone but himself. That's who he is. But he's not your problem anymore, Laura. You don't need him. She sighed. I just feel so stupid. I didn't see it. I didn't see how bad things had gotten until it was too late. I leaned back, looking at her. You're not stupid. You were trusting. And that's not the same as being naive. Ethan is the one who's screwed up. And you've got the strength to move on. Believe me, you'll be better off. She gave me a small, tired smile. You really think so? I know so, I said. You've already got the hardest part out of the way. Now, it's about rebuilding. For both of us. She nodded, taking a deep breath. I could see the weight lifting from her, and honestly, it was starting to lift for me too. Ethan's downfall wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about letting go, reclaiming control over our lives, and moving forward. We both had the chance to rebuild, to find a life beyond the chaos our exes had created. For the first time in what felt like months, I started thinking about what my next step would be. I was finally free. Free from Amanda's lies. Free from Ethan's manipulations. And even though the road ahead was still uncertain, I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let them define my future anymore. I looked at Laura, and for the first time in a long while, I actually felt a little hope. It's weird, but after everything, I almost felt like I was waking up from a bad dream. I'd spent so long caught up in the anger, the hurt, the revenge, that I hadn't realized how much I'd been holding my breath. But now that everything had come crashing down, the dust was starting to settle. The thing was, it wasn't even just about the revenge anymore. Yeah, it felt good to see Ethan's career in ruins, to watch Amanda lose everything she thought she could control, but what really hit me was how much lighter I felt now. The weight of all that resentment, all that pain, was starting to lift. And for the first time in a long time, I was thinking about what I actually wanted in life, instead of just how to make them pay. The first thing I did was focus on myself. I'd lost a lot over the years: my sense of self, my direction, even some of my friends who had chosen sides in the mess with Amanda. But as the days went on, I started reconnecting with things I used to enjoy. I started taking long walks again, reading books I'd always wanted to dive into but never had time for. It was like rediscovering parts of me I'd forgotten. And then, of course, there was Laura. We kept in touch over the next few weeks. I wasn't sure at first if we were just two broken people leaning on each other, but the more we talked, the more I realized she wasn't just someone to commiserate with. We were actually getting to know each other in a way I hadn't expected. One evening, after a couple of beers, we were talking about our pasts, about Ethan and Amanda, about how we had been dragged into their mess, and I could see something shift in her. She wasn't just the woman wronged by her husband anymore. She was someone who had come out the other side stronger, wiser. And she made me feel the same way. You know, she said, I never thought I'd be able to trust anyone again. After everything with Ethan. I thought that part of me was gone, you know. I nodded, trying to figure out how to put my own thoughts into words. I get it. I felt the same. Like, how could I trust anyone again after everything Amanda did? There was a long pause before Laura spoke again. But I think I'm ready to try. Not right away, obviously. But maybe, one day. It was the first time I'd heard her talk about her future without the shadow of Ethan hanging over her. And when she said that, I felt something stir in me too. Maybe I wasn't quite as ready to dive into a new relationship, but I knew I was capable of it. And for the first time in forever, I didn't feel broken. We spent the next few months slowly getting to know each other, not rushing anything, just letting things unfold. It felt easy, like breathing after being underwater for too long. In the meantime, Amanda's life fell apart in ways I couldn't even have predicted. She tried to salvage her career, but after everything went public, she was forced to leave her job. Her reputation was in tatters, and her friends started pulling away. I wasn't watching from the sidelines, but I did hear from mutual friends. Apparently, her parents had stopped speaking to her. It was like she was paying for everything she had done, and there was no escape. I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. I just couldn't. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. But that was the end of it for me. Ethan and Amanda were no longer a part of my life. I didn't care what happened to them. They had their own consequences to deal with, and I had mine to rebuild. And rebuild I did. By the time Laura and I went out for our first official date, I felt like I was standing on solid ground again. I wasn't the same guy I had been before all of this happened, but in a strange way, that was a good thing. I had learned a lot about who I was, what I could tolerate, and what I deserved. I wasn't going to settle for a life of lies and half-truths anymore. In a way, Ethan's downfall wasn't just about him. It had been a catalyst for me to wake up, for me to start living for myself again. And when I looked at Laura that night, I knew that the future was wide open. There was still a lot to figure out, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had a chance. The revenge was satisfying, sure, but it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of my new life. A lot happened in the months that followed. The biggest change? It was me, really me, getting back to living my life, taking control, and building a future that didn't have Amanda or Ethan in it. I'd been so wrapped up in their drama for so long, but now, I was learning how to focus on my own goals again. It was a weird feeling at first, like I didn't even know what I wanted anymore. But slowly, I started figuring it out. As for Laura and me, we were still taking things slow. There was no pressure. We'd spent so much time dealing with betrayal, heartbreak, and rebuilding, that neither of us were in a rush to start anything new. But there was something there. Something real. She was becoming someone I could see myself with, not as a rebound, but as someone who understood what it was like to come out of the wreckage and find hope again. One night, a couple of months after our first date, we were sitting on the balcony of my apartment, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. It had been a quiet evening, just the two of us, talking about everything and nothing. She looked at me, her expression soft. "I'm glad you're in my life, Caleb," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "I think we both needed someone who understands what it's like to lose everything and still keep going." I didn't know how to respond at first. I hadn't thought of it that way, but she was right. We were both in this strange place, where our pasts were part of us, but they didn't define us anymore. We'd both been broken, in different ways, and now we were learning to heal together. "I'm glad too," I said, feeling something warm in my chest. "I never thought I'd get here, you know? But I think I'm starting to believe that things can get better." And they did. Little by little, things did get better. My confidence came back. I started making plans for the future: travel, work projects, personal goals. I wasn't chasing revenge anymore, I was just living. I even reconnected with a few old friends I'd lost touch with during the mess with Amanda. They'd reached out, and it felt good to rebuild those connections, to show them that I was me again. As for Ethan and Amanda, their lives were still a mess. Ethan had been fired, of course, and his marriage to Laura was over. I had heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd been trying to get back into the industry, but no one wanted to touch him with a 10-foot pole. He was a pariah. Amanda, on the other hand, was still picking up the pieces of her career, but she had a long road ahead. Her friends had all distanced themselves, and her parents had cut her off completely. She was alone. I wasn't celebrating their downfall anymore. I wasn't angry. But it was hard not to feel a small sense of justice, knowing they had to face the consequences of their actions. I had walked away, found closure, and moved forward. They were stuck in the mess they had created for themselves. But that was their story, not mine. Looking back, I couldn't believe how much had changed in such a short time. From a man who was broken, consumed by betrayal, to someone who could finally say that I was okay, better than okay, actually. I was happy. I had the power to choose the direction of my life now. As Laura and I continued to grow closer, I realized something important. Revenge in its most satisfying form doesn't always come from ruining someone else's life. Sometimes, the sweetest form of revenge is the life you build afterward. The peace you find when you no longer let the betrayal define you. And in that sense, I'd won. I was free. And I wasn't looking back. A few months down the road, things felt steady. I wasn't just living in the aftermath anymore, I was starting to thrive. The anger I'd held onto for so long was fading, replaced by a quiet peace I hadn't expected. Life was slowly returning to normal, and I was learning how to enjoy it again. Laura and I were still growing closer. There were moments when I felt like we were both taking cautious steps, almost like we were testing the waters of a new beginning. But every time we spent time together, it felt more natural. She wasn't Amanda. She wasn't the woman who betrayed me. And in many ways, she was becoming someone I could trust again, not just with my past, but with my future. We started doing more things together: weekend hikes, cooking dinner at my place, even going on a couple of weekend trips. It was simple, but it felt right. One night, as we were sitting on the couch watching a movie, Laura looked at me, her face soft. "I never imagined things would turn out this way, you know," she said quietly. "I thought I'd always be stuck in the past, always wondering what I did wrong." I looked at her, unsure of what to say. I'd been there. I'd been stuck in my head, caught up in the what-ifs. But I knew now that there was no going back. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said, meaning every word. "Sometimes life just happens. And you deal with it, or it swallows you whole." She smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "I'm glad I had you to deal with it." And in that moment, I realized how far we'd both come. Neither of us was defined by the people who had hurt us. We were writing our own stories now. Things weren't perfect. There were still moments of doubt, of wondering if we were rushing into something, but they were rare. And when they came, we talked them out. I had learned from the mess with Amanda that communication and trust were everything. We built it from the ground up, and it felt stronger because of it. As for Amanda and Ethan, their lives kept unraveling, but I didn't care. The wreckage they'd left behind wasn't my problem anymore. I had learned that the best form of justice was simply moving on. Letting them live with their mistakes, while I lived mine, a better version of myself. One evening, a few months after all of this started, Laura and I sat on the balcony again, watching the sunset. "I think we're going to be okay," I said, looking at her. She smiled, her eyes glinting with a little spark of hope I hadn't seen before. "I think so too." And for the first time in a long while, I didn't need to look back. The past was the past. The future, however, was wide open. As the months passed, things just kept falling into place. I wasn't expecting perfection. Life doesn't work that way, but it felt like I had finally found the balance I'd been searching for. The chaos from my past had faded into the background, like the noise of a storm you weathered but didn't let define you. Laura and I had built something real. It wasn't a quick fix or a rebound. It was two people who had learned the hard way what betrayal felt like, and who were slowly learning how to trust again. We'd spent months getting to know each other, really talking about what we wanted and what we needed. The more time we spent together, the more I realized just how much I respected her. She wasn't rushing me or putting any pressure on me, just letting me take my time, which meant more than I could put into words. One weekend, we went away for a couple of days to a small cabin by the lake. It was peaceful, just the two of us, no distractions, no expectations. We spent hours talking, sharing things we'd never said out loud before. And by the end of that trip, I felt something shift. I wasn't just healing from my past anymore. I was building something new, something better. On the drive back, Laura turned to me with a soft smile. "I think I'm starting to believe that we can actually have a future together, Caleb." I didn't have to think twice before answering. "I think we already do." And we did. The past had shaped us, but it didn't control us anymore. There was a future ahead of us, one where the hurt and the revenge didn't matter. It was just about us, our lives, and the fresh start we were creating together. For the first time in a long time, I didn't need to look over my shoulder. The wreckage of my past had become a distant memory, and I was finally free to live for the life I was building, one day at a time. A year passed, and life felt normal again. Not perfect, but good. There were no more late-night texts, no more wondering what Amanda or Ethan were up to. The weight of everything that had happened had finally lifted, and I felt like I was walking on solid ground. Laura and I had grown even closer, and though we'd never rushed into anything, it was clear we had something strong. We made plans together, small things at first, like weekend trips or fixing up my apartment, but it felt like we were building a life side by side. It wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about learning from it and choosing to move forward together. One evening, we were sitting on the couch after a long day, and she looked at me with that same soft smile I had come to love. "You know," she said, "I think we're doing something really good here. I feel like I can breathe again." I didn't need to say anything. I just took her hand and squeezed it, knowing she felt the same way. We didn't need to dwell on the past. What mattered now was this: the life we were creating, step by step. As for Amanda and Ethan, I had heard a little about them here and there, but it didn't affect me anymore. Ethan was still struggling to pick up the pieces of his life, and Amanda was still trying to rebuild, but I didn't care. They were no longer part of my story. I was living my own life now, one that had nothing to do with their mistakes. And for the first time, I felt genuinely content. The future, whatever it held, was mine. Life had settled into a rhythm I didn't even know I needed until I had it. I woke up every day feeling like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. There was peace in that, in knowing I had finally let go of the chaos Amanda and Ethan had brought into my world. One night, after a quiet dinner at my place, Laura and I found ourselves talking about our pasts again. Not in a heavy way, but in the way two people do when they've come through something hard and want to understand each other better. I could tell she had been thinking about it, about what happened with Ethan and how we had both found our way to this place together. "I never thought I'd get to this point," she said, her voice soft but sure. "After everything with Ethan, I was convinced I'd be alone forever. I didn't think I'd ever trust anyone again. But here I am. With you. And it feels right. I looked at her, a little surprised at how much those words meant. I didn't think I'd be here either, I admitted. I was so caught up in what happened with Amanda, in the anger and the betrayal. But now? I think I'm finally free of all that. Free to just live. She smiled, and for a moment, everything felt simple. We weren't stuck in the past anymore, no longer letting the scars dictate our future. We were just two people, trying to make something good out of the wreckage that had been left behind. It wasn't easy, and there were still hard days. But those were the days when we held each other a little tighter, talked a little longer, and made sure we didn't take the peace we had for granted. And when I looked at Laura, I realized that in the end, the best revenge wasn't in tearing their lives apart, it was in rebuilding mine. And that's exactly what I was doing. I didn't need anything else. The life I was living now, the one I'd fought for, was more than enough. It's funny how life works out. Sometimes, you think you're stuck in a chapter that'll never end, but eventually, the pages turn. And before you know it, you're living a story you never thought possible. Looking back now, I can honestly say I've never been happier. There's no more anger. No more bitterness. No more revenge. What's left is just a life I built from the ground up, piece by piece. And it's not perfect. But it's mine. Laura and I are doing well. We've taken our time, and we're in no rush to move faster than we're ready for. But I can see a future with her. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Together we've healed, not just from our exes, but from the versions of ourselves that were stuck in the past. Now, we're just living in the present, focusing on what makes us happy. I think we both finally understand something we didn't before. The only way to truly move on from betrayal is to stop looking back. It's tempting sometimes to want to keep score or check in on the people who wronged you. But in the end, the best thing you can do is let go. And that's exactly what I did. I let go. So yeah, maybe this wasn't the revenge story you were expecting, but it's the one I needed. I took back control of my life, rebuilt it, and found peace in doing so. And that's worth more than any kind of payback could ever be. The best revenge? It's living well. And I am.